When U.S. Congresswoman Maxine Waters shocked the room by labeling Captain Ibrahim Traoré a thug, no one expected what came next. In just seconds, Traoré's powerful words and calm but sharp response left the audience stunned and Waters with nothing to say. This viral moment shows the strength, composure, and brilliance of Traoré in the face of open disrespect. The Washington, D.C. conference room was filled with diplomats, journalists, and government officials. It was meant to be a quiet panel on U.S.-Africa relations, but the air suddenly turned heavy when Congresswoman Maxine Waters leaned forward, her voice sharp. "Captain Traoré," she said, eyes narrowing. "Some call you a revolutionary, but I call you what you are, a thug." The words cut through the room like a blade. Gasps echoed. Pens froze mid-scribble. Cameras zoomed in instantly. Traoré, dressed in his simple military green uniform, did not move. His expression was calm, almost unreadable. He folded his hands on the table and let the silence stretch. Waters leaned back in her chair, certain she had landed the blow. But the longer Traoré sat still, the more uneasy the room became. Then slowly he lifted his eyes, steady, piercing, but without anger. He did not raise his voice. He did not shout. Instead, he began to speak in words so deliberate, so powerful that the entire hall leaned in without realizing it. What came next would leave Waters silent and the world shaken. "Madam," Traoré began, his tone soft but commanding. "In my country, the thug is a man who steals from the poor, who crushes the weak, who sells his people's future for his own comfort. If that is what you mean, then I am not the thug in this room." The words landed with the weight of stone. Murmurs spread across the hall. Cameras captured every second. He continued his accent, coloring each word with rhythm and force. A leader, true leader, stands in front of his people when there is danger and behind them when there is victory. That is what I have chosen to be. If defending my people from exploitation makes me a thug in your eyes, then I accept your insult as a badge of honor. Waters shifted uneasily. She opened her mouth, but no words came. For the first time, the American audience saw Ibrahim Traoré not as a distant African figure, but as a man unafraid to speak truth in the very heart of power. The silence that followed was deafening. Even those who had doubted him moments before now looked at him with something else: respect. The exchange spread like fire. Within hours, clips of Traoré's words were flooding social media. Hashtags trended worldwide. Not a thug in Voice of Africa. But inside the conference, something more profound was happening. Reporters who had come expecting routine politics were visibly shaken. Some dabbed at their eyes as Traoré spoke further. He told stories not of war or power, but of children in Burkina Faso walking miles barefoot to attend schools with no roofs. He spoke of mothers who worked the fields from sunrise to sunset just to buy one loaf of bread. "These," he said, holding up a photo of a young boy, "are the people I fight for. If my hands are dirty, it is with the dust of my land, not the blood of my people." The room was silent again, but this time it was not from shock. It was from the weight of truth. Even critics who had dismissed him before now sat still, unsure how to respond. Maxine Waters kept her head down. The congresswoman who had called him a thug had nothing left to say. And for Traoré, this was only the beginning of a week that would change everything. After the session ended, the hall emptied in uneasy silence. Journalists rushed to send out breaking headlines, but inside the corridor, whispers grew louder. Some diplomats nodded quietly at Traoré as he walked past. Others avoided eye contact, unsettled by what they had witnessed. Maxine Waters lingered behind. For the first time in years, she had been left without words. A staffer tried to console her, but she brushed him off, her eyes fixed on the ground. Traoré walked steadily, his expression unreadable. Behind him, aides from Burkina Faso followed closely, carrying his worn leather briefcase and stacks of documents. But the atmosphere had shifted. People who had once seen him as too young or too bold now looked at him with a new kind of respect. Outside the building, a small group of African students studying in Washington waited for him. When they saw him emerge, they broke into applause. One young woman, holding a handmade sign that read, "We see you, Captain," burst into tears. Traoré paused, placed a hand gently on her shoulder, and said, "Courage! always courage. The cameras captured it. That one moment traveled farther than Watt's insult ever could. By nightfall, the video had circled the globe. News outlets ran the headline. Tro silences Congresswoman with words that stunned America. On social media, millions replayed his calm, measured response. In Ouagadougou, the capital of Burkina Faso, people crowded around radios and televisions. Streets that were usually filled with chatter fell quiet as they listened to their young leader's voice echoing in a distant American hall. Mothers wept. Fathers nodded with pride. Children repeated his words like a pledge. If my hands are dirty, it is with the dust of my land, not the blood of my people. Meanwhile, in Europe and across Africa, debates raged. Some analysts called him reckless. Others said he had spoken the purest truth they had heard in decades. But for ordinary people, farmers, teachers, market women, it was not politics. It was dignity. In a cafe in Paris, an elderly Birkin Bay immigrant wiped his eyes and whispered to his grandson, "That boy reminds me of Sun Car." But beyond the praise and criticism, one fact was undeniable. Traoré had captured the world's attention. And for him, attention was not the prize. It was the responsibility. That night in his modest hotel room in Washington, Traoré sat at the desk with a pen in hand. The noise of the city hummed beyond the window, but he ignored it. He wrote not to politicians nor to press, but to his people back home. My dear brothers and sisters of Burkina Faso, the letter began. Today I was called a thug, but I carried your voices with me, and with your voices I stood tall. He wrote about the students he had met outside, about the young woman whose tears carried the weight of an entire generation. He wrote about the need to remain calm in the face of insults, to answer not with anger but with.
The next session of the forum began. The chairs filled with world leaders, experts, and lawmakers, but one chair stood noticeably empty. Maxine Waters. Speculation ran wild. Some whispered that she was embarrassed. Others claimed she was preparing a counterattack. But for Tro, her absence meant nothing. He hadn't come for confrontation. He had come for truth. As the meeting resumed, the moderator unexpectedly turned to Tro. "Mr. President, after yesterday's exchange, would you like to continue your remarks?" All eyes locked on him. Tro adjusted the microphone slowly. His voice was calm, steady. "I am not here to fight names," he said. "I am here to fight hunger, poverty, and the chains that still bind Africa. Call me what you wish, but remember this. Every insult thrown at me falls on the back of a people who only ask for dignity." The hall grew still. One American senator leaned forward, whispering to a colleague, "This young man is different." That night in his hotel room, Traoré's phone rang. The call came from Ouagadougou. It was an old-school teacher of his, a man who had once taught him to read under a flickering lantern during blackouts. "My boy," the teacher's voice cracked with emotion, "we heard your words today. You carried us in your heart, and we felt it. Never forget, you are not alone." For a moment, the fearless captain fell silent, blinking back tears. "Thank you, teacher," he whispered. "You gave me the words I used today." The call ended, but the weight of it lingered. Traoré looked out the window at the city lights of Washington, so far from his dusty streets back home. Yet in that moment, he felt closer to Burkina Faso than ever. He clenched his fist softly, not in anger, but in resolve. "If they try to silence me," he murmured to himself, "the world will still hear us." And deep down, he knew this was no longer just about one insult. It was about a voice that refused to die. The following morning, the conference hall buzzed with tension. Everyone wondered if Maxine Waters would return to her seat. To everyone's surprise, she did. Chin high, face unreadable. The moderator invited her to speak. She stood, cleared her throat, and instead of words, she walked out. Cameras flashed as the door closed behind her. Gasps filled the room. Reporters typed furiously. Waters storms out after Traoré's remarks. The young African president leaves her speechless. But Traoré didn't smile. He didn't gloat. Instead, he leaned forward into the microphone and said quietly, "When truth is spoken, some choose silence, some choose escape. But silence cannot erase the cry of millions." The room froze. His words weren't aimed at Waters. They were aimed at history itself. Back in Burkina Faso, the walkout was replayed on every television screen. Mothers with children on their laps shook their heads. Farmers resting after a long day whispered, "He stood for us." And she ran away. For the people, this wasn't just politics anymore. It was dignity. Later that evening, Traoré was invited to a smaller forum where young African students studying in America had gathered. The atmosphere was warmer, but the air still carried the weight of what had happened. As he stepped off the stage after speaking, a young woman approached him. She was trembling. "President Traoré," she said, her voice breaking, "I'm from Burkina Faso too. I came here on a scholarship. I saw what they called you today. It broke my heart. But then I heard your response, and suddenly I wasn't ashamed anymore. I was proud." Tears streamed down her cheeks. Traoré placed a hand gently on her shoulder. His eyes softened. "Do not cry for me, daughter. Cry for those who cannot yet speak. But wipe your tears quickly, because we must rise for them." The students erupted into applause, some crying, some cheering. For those young Africans far from home, that night was unforgettable. Back in his hotel room later, Traoré sat in silence. Replaying the young woman's trembling voice in his mind, he whispered to himself, "This fight is not about me. It's about them." The next morning, Washington woke to chaos. A private draft letter written by Traoré to his aides had been leaked to the press. No one knew who leaked it, but within hours it was everywhere. In the letter, Traoré had written, "If my voice shakes the halls of power here, it is only because I carry the voices of miners who dig with bare hands, mothers who sell oranges under the sun, and children who study under lanterns. If they call me a thug, let it be known I am the thug of the poor, the orphan, and the forgotten." The words hit like thunder. Social media exploded. Hashtags with his name trended across continents. In Burkina Faso, people painted his words on walls. In America, journalists debated their meaning. That evening, as he prepared for another session, one aide whispered, "Mr. President, the world has just seen your heart." Traoré adjusted his jacket slowly. "Good," he replied softly, "because that is all I have to give." He walked out of his room knowing the days ahead would not just test his strength, they would test his soul. That night, after the letter leak shook Washington, Traoré retreated to his room. He had been calm all day, but in the stillness of the night, his heart longed for home. He picked up his phone and dialed Ouagadougou. His mother answered. Her voice was soft, filled with warmth. "My son, I saw what they called you," she said. "They think they can shame you, but do they know whose child you are? You carry your father's courage. You carry my prayers." Traoré closed his eyes, swallowing the lump in his throat. "Mother, sometimes I wonder, am I strong enough? This fight is heavy." "You are strong," she whispered, "not because you do not cry, but because you cry for your people. Remember, when you stand there, you are never alone. The whole of Burkina Faso stands with you." Her words pierced his heart. A tear rolled down his cheek. For the first time that week, he allowed himself to weep quietly. When the call ended, he whispered, "For you, mother. For them I will not break." The following morning, an American journalist aired a short documentary clip about Burkina Faso. It showed children walking miles barefoot to school, women balancing buckets of water on their heads, and men working in dusty mines for scraps of gold. The video was meant to explain why Traoré spoke with such intensity. But no one expected what came next. A final clip showing Traoré, long before he became president, standing among soldiers and villagers, lifting a child who had fainted from hunger. The caption read, "Before politics, he was their brother." The footage spread instantly. In cafes and buses, people watched and cried. Online, Americans began to comment. "Maybe we judged him wrong. He's not a thug. He's a leader." When Traoré saw the clip, he sat in silence. His aides expected him to celebrate, but instead he whispered, "They should not cry for me. They should cry for that child." Has anything changed since that day? His words cut deeper than the clip itself. By the 5th day of the week, the tension had reached its peak. During a private committee session, Maxine Waters unexpectedly asked to speak. The room grew still. Her voice trembled as she looked at Traoré. "When I called you a thug, I spoke from ignorance and arrogance. But the world has shown me who you really are. And today I stand corrected." She paused, then added, "You are a voice for the voiceless, and for that I owe you and your people an apology." The room gasped. Some lawmakers nodded in agreement, others shifted uncomfortably, but the moment was real. Traoré looked at her with calm eyes. "Madam Waters," he said gently, "you hurt me, but they wounded my people more. If you truly regret them, then honor them, not with apologies but with actions." Waters' eyes glistened. She bowed her head slightly. For the first time, she had no defense, only silence. Outside, the news broke within minutes. Maxine Waters apologizes to Traoré in tearful session. It was a moment no one had predicted, one that turned the story upside down. The morning after Maxine Waters' apology, Traoré was scheduled to speak at a major U.S.-Africa leadership forum. But when the event began, an empty chair stood where he was meant to sit. Murmurs filled the hall. "Where is he? Why didn't he come?" Minutes later, a message was delivered to the moderator. Traoré had left the hotel quietly and spent the morning visiting a small African immigrant community in Washington, D.C. He wanted to meet them, listen to their struggles, and pray with them before stepping onto the world stage. When the cameras finally caught up, he was in a humble church basement holding the hand of a weeping mother who said, "They call you a thug, but to us you are hope." That image, his hand holding hers, spread faster than wildfire. The empty chair at the forum was no longer seen as absence. It became a symbol. People whispered, "He chose the people before the politics." The hall erupted when he finally arrived. The applause wasn't polite. It was thunderous, like a storm, refusing to stop. When Traoré stepped up to the podium, the room fell silent. His voice was calm, but each word cut deep. "You called me a thug. Yet a thug does not build schools. A thug does not fight for children to eat. A thug does not risk his life for strangers. A thug does not carry the dream of a nation on his shoulders." The hall trembled with silence, eyes filled with tears. He continued, "If I am a thug for loving my people, then may the world call me that. But know this, no insult can kill truth, and the truth is Africa deserves dignity. Burkina Faso deserves peace. Humanity deserves leaders who care, not leaders who conquer." Cameras zoomed in on faces across the room. Even Waters herself had tears glistening in her eyes. For a full minute after he stopped, no one moved. Then, as if released by some unseen force, the audience rose to its feet. Applause roared. Some cried openly. That clip became the most replayed moment of the week. The internet crowned it, the speech that shook America. The week ended with a quiet evening. Traoré sat by the window of his hotel, watching the city lights. Reporters had already called him a hero, but he wasn't thinking of headlines. He was thinking of the child in the video, the barefoot boy who fainted from hunger years ago. He whispered, "I hope he's alive today." Then he pulled out a small notebook, one he always carried. Inside were the names of villages, schools, and mothers he had met. He wrote one final line before closing it. No insult can shake a heart that beats for its people. A knock came at his door. It was a staff member holding a message from a Burkina Faso schoolgirl. The note read, "President Traoré, when they called you a thug, I cried. But when you spoke, I stood taller, because you made me proud to be Burkina. For the first time that week, Traoré allowed a single tear to fall, a tear of both pain and pride. And that was the tear the world never forgot. To my dear viewers, if this story touched your heart, if it made you cry, smile, or believe in dignity again, I want you to pause, wipe your tears, and now do something powerful. Hit that like button if you believe true leaders still exist. Subscribe so you never miss stories that reveal truth, courage, and humanity. And most importantly, drop a comment. Tell me what moment in this story broke your heart the most.